Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of thechocolatelife.com. So before we get into today's live stream, and the topic is looking at the world through chocolate-colored glasses, what I just want to do is take a quick time out and mention that this episode, as every episode of The Chocolate Life Live, is sponsored by the members of thechocolatelife.com. If you're not a member, you can go over there, join. There's a free account. There's also some premium accounts, and all of this goes towards helping keep the Chocolate Life Live coming to you every week. And if you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, but YouTube especially, go like the video and share it with others, maybe subscribe to the channel on YouTube. And before I jump into it, I want to remind everybody, no matter where you're checking in from today, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, no matter where you are in the world, go into the comments. Let me know where you're checking in, and I will get that information up on the screen, and we'll share that with you. And of course, during the course of the hour, if you have questions or comments about the topic today, just again, put them in the comments and I will get the questions up on the screen and we'll get them asked, and I'll do my best to answer them over the course of the hour. Before we begin, I'm going to do a quick screen share. This is the homepage of thechocolatelife.com. Right now, you can go there. For every single one of these live streams, I put together a post. The post for today's live stream looks like this. You would be surprised how hard it is to find an image of a chocolate-colored Labrador Retriever wearing glasses. Even chocolate-covered glasses or glasses with chocolate-colored lenses in them, and so I had to make do with a golden retriever. I realized that I don't have a lot of dog and cat meme-like things going on here, and I thought I wanted to have that fun as a part of the image for today's post. But in the post, every single one of these posts, what I do is I put together links as well as an episode overview. So here are the things that we're going to talk about over the course of the day. And then, of course, if you go to the homepage, there is an archive. And you can go click on the archive, and every single link to every single live stream is posted here with links to watch the videos for every single one of them. And then there's also a list of upcoming episodes. So this coming Friday, actually this coming Tuesday, so in a couple of days, I'm going to be doing a chocolate and whiskey pairing. And so following that, I'm going to catch up on my impressions doing the chocolate whiskey pairing, 4 Arizona whiskeys and 4 Arizona chocolates from 2 different makers. And then on the last Friday of the month, I'm going to be talking about woke washing, which is a topic that I brought up a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to go into greater depth. But with that, let's go to today's topic. And the topic is looking at the world through chocolate-colored glasses. And what that means for me is people ask me, hey, Clay, a couple of questions really, really often. Number one is, hey, Clay, how did you get into the world of chocolate? What was the inspiration? What got you into the world of chocolate? And the short answer is that I was in a business trip in the south of France in 1994, where I discovered single origin chocolate for the first time. So this was the chocolate of the Bonnat family. And I had an epiphany, an entrepreneurial epiphany, a couple of weeks later after coming back to New York, where I was living at the time. And I said, there are professional critics for everything in the world. There's no such thing as professional critics for chocolate. I'm going to become the world's first professional chocolate critic. So that's the simple answer, which is I just decided one day to do it. That's how I got into chocolate. I didn't get into chocolate because I loved chocolate. I learned to love chocolate as a result of a business decision to get into chocolate. So once I made the decision to become a chocolate critic, the challenge that I faced was, what does it mean to be a critic? How am I going to rate chocolate? How am I going to review chocolate? What do I need to learn about how chocolate is made? What are the differences, for example, between chocolate and wine and chocolate and beer? And what are the differences in the criticism that surrounds those things? So there was a lot of work that I needed to do. in order to figure out what it meant to be a critic. And I was fortunate in my personal circumstances at the time, and I thought it would take somewhere between 5 and 10 years for the market to catch up to where my thought process was, and 7 years after I had my encounter with single origin chocolate in 1994. So in May of 2001, early May June 2001, I started chocophile.com. And so that journey was quite extensive. I was fortunate to run into a gentleman by the name of Pierrick Chouard. Pierrick was the founder of Vintage Chocolates, now Vintage Plantation Chocolates. He gave me a job selling Michel Cluzel and Domori to high-end restaurants and hotels in New York and around the world, around the United States. I also took his University of Chocolate trips to Ecuador in 2003 and 2005. Really seminal connection that I made. In 1998, I had an opportunity to go from New York and visit the Bonnat family in France. So really, it was a really interesting early part of my career. Now, why did I think that I could do this? I mean, it's another thing. It's like, I have no experience in chocolate. I have no experience as a critic. What was my background that let me get into that? Let me get into the world of being a chocolate critic. And if, in some respects, my background is the perfect background for becoming a chocolate critic. I have an undergraduate fine arts degree in photography from the Rhode Island School of Design. And from the freshman year in high school, I wanted to be a professional photographer. And I pursued my education in high school and college to go to meet that end. And I, again, very fortunate. When I was at Rhode Island School of Design, I had a chance to work for a summer at a gallery in New York City. There, I was working with the catalogs of Lee Friedlander, Larry Clark, the book Tulsa, the film Kids, also the work of John Fall. I also had an opportunity to meet a gentleman by the name of Wolfgang Hoyt, who was who was a member of Ezra Stoller's studio. So Ezra Stoller is the Dean of American Architectural Photography. And so lots of really interesting things happened while I was at Rhode Island School of Design. And then perhaps the most important one is that I had a chance to take the first computer class ever offered at RISD. And it was with a semiotician, a gentleman by the name of Miha Nadine. It was taught by graduate students from Brown University who were part of the computer science department there. I had a chance to go to the predecessor of the Media Lab, Muriel Cooper, at the Visible Language Workshop. I mean, I was very fortunate to be in the circumstances that I was in, and at least had enough presence of mind to take advantage of what it was that I was doing, even though there was no clear path as to what it is that I was going to be doing. And all of this came together when I was thinking about my first book, Discover Chocolate, in 2006 and 2007. And as I started thinking about my role as a communicator and educator in the world of cocoa and chocolate. So from the beginning, while I felt it was really important to understand how to make chocolate and how chocolate is made, I never considered myself an expert in chocolate. I think that the people who get their hands dirty in it every day, one of them being Chef Jeffrey Gardner. Chef, good morning. You're from Manhattan Beach, I believe, in California. I thought I saw some notice you're opening up a new a flagship retail operation. So congratulations in that, Chef. So glad to have you back here today. But people who get their hands and fingers in chocolate every day are the people that I consider to be the experts. I have very specifically not, don't call myself, as I say, don't call myself an expert. I've always considered myself to be an outside observer. So my role here is to understand all the, to the extent that it's possible to know all of these things. My goal here is to understand as many different things as I possibly can and to find connections between them. And as a matter of fact, people may remember that there was a I think maybe 1970s era television series, a guy by the name of James Burke, called Connections. And I think that as a young child, that sort of that sort of looking at the world and just trying to find connections between things was something that really, really impressed me, and is something that I want to do. Something that I want to do, and I brought that into the world of chocolate. That I would spend time learning about all these different things and see if I could find connections to them. And I want to say thank you to Javier Palacios and Zambrano, who's connecting to us today from Ecuador. And siempre es un gusto escuchar las charlas. I understand about half of that. I would have to do the translation of it in order to be able to get there. But thank you very, very much for that. Henry, if you can do the English translation for me, or somebody's in it who can do the English translation for me, so I don't have to jump out into a translation app, I'd appreciate that. And so that sort of history and that sort of background was what I was thinking about when I was asked about 2 months ago to work with a group of homeschool students to create a class in chocolate. And that's what I did yesterday. I had an opportunity to sit with a group of 23 students between the ages of 6 and I would say 14 or 15, and spend an hour talking about chocolate. And the question for me was going to be always, what is that, how do I engage, number one, with that age range? So you've got some 6-year-olds, a pair of just like really, 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 really cute, engaging boys. I think they were twins. Really lovely, and just the level of education and the level of understanding of all them, of all the people who are going to be in the room. And again, this being my first introduction to them, not really knowing anything about any of their background as students, right, and what their strengths and weaknesses were. And so what I decided to do is I decided to spend some time talking about or thinking about arranging my presentation around, number one, asking all of them questions. So number one, what do you know about chocolate? How is it made? Where does chocolate come from? All these kinds of things. And I was lucky to be able to be holding the class in a chocolate factory. And so I had access to nibs, and I had access to chocolate, and I had access to props, including dried cocoa pods. I had my own photography hung on the wall. So this wonderful picture of photographs, a wonderful picture of pods taken in Nicaragua, and a pod and half open with seeds in it that I took in Mexico, that I could use as props. Some cacao leaves that I brought back from Ecuador or from Brazil with me last summer, and lots of props to engage them with. But still, it was an interesting challenge for me to be able to figure out how am I going to go and present the chocolate. And my first thoughts about the approach were I wanted to do actually as little lecturing as I could, and as much reacting as I could. So asking questions like, where does chocolate come from? And what kinds of chocolate are there? And what are the ingredients in chocolate? And pointing out where, for example, one of the photographs I mentioned is a series of cocoa pods. And what I will do is I'll put those images into the post for today's live stream. I realized I forgot to do that. I'll put them in the post so you can take a look at the 2 photographs that I'm thinking about. Is that enabled us to make a connection between chocolate and geography. And so it's one thing to say, okay, cocoa trees grow plus or minus 20 degrees of the equator. We know that for a 9-year-old, that's a fairly abstract context to make. And even for people who are much older, 20 degrees, what does 20 degrees mean, right, in terms of, above and below the equator? These are very, very abstract concepts, but to be able to say, okay, here is um, here is a country, Nicaragua, and here is a country, Mexico, and you can you and here is when we talk about tasting chocolate. So here is a country, Tanzania. Where is Tanzania in the world? Africa. And so we could make the points about geography in very, 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 I think, concrete kinds of ways, which were really, really, really important to me. Chef, I'm going to jump in and share this with you now because here we are in doing this. So you started your chocolate journey in 1994 in Winnipeg, Canada, and yes, tomorrow we open another store. You went from professional hockey to chocolate. You blame it on the female persuasion. I don't buy that. Both. So learned to love chocolate through the years. Booked profoundly at the many parcels we used to receive in the mail from your grandmother or from France. Dark, so white chocolate used to send it with all, of course, some socks and other clothes in those wonderful packages. No, absolutely. Um, very, 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 very much. I mean, I think one of the things which is really interesting about many of the people I know who are in chocolate is that people came to it either as an adolescent or a young adult passion, or they came to it as a second career. It wasn't necessarily something that they grew up in. So certainly, knowing Stefan Bonat as I have, his family has been making chocolate since 1884, and he's in this, wonderful situation. And fortunately, he has children who want to take over the business from him, who are learning how to make chocolate, and they've got the passion that he does. Philippe Bernachon, who's a friend of Stéphane Bonat, I've met Philippe. So Francois Parlou and his friend Hugo, my son Hugo. I mean, it's wonderful when the generational thing can happen. But many of us come to chocolate in a very, very different way. And so what I wanted to do as I was thinking about putting together the curriculum for yesterday, what I wanted to do, not knowing where any of these children came from in terms of their background, wanted to think about chocolate colored, what I think of as chocolate colored lenses. All right. And with the notion of saying, hey guys, I've been doing this now for more than 20 years professionally, and I've had an interest in chocolate for more than 30 years, keeping in mind that the oldest of these kids is 15 or so. And so if you're going to be doing something like that, how do you keep it fresh and interesting for you? And as a result of that sort of thinking about how I was going to approach the class yesterday, I was reminded of this Japanese concept called ikigai. Well, it's not called ikigai, that's the name of this concept, ikigai. And what ikigai is all about is finding something that you are interested in and that you are good at, right? And then if you can find the intersection of those two things, if you look at the Venn diagram, where do they overlap, right? Then you can find something in your life that drives you forward, that you can find purpose and meaning in. And in and of itself, that's a good thing. That purpose and meaning, from an art perspective, my background is John Dewey, art is experience, and so it's meaningful if you're the only person who benefits from it. But if there's also a larger benefit from it, right, so that you can improve the lives of other people through that intersection of your passion, of your interest and your talent, then that's also a good thing. And that ikigai has, for me, is very, very much a part of what I think of as the chocolate life. So the chocolate life is also about finding that intersection of something that you're good at and something that interests you, right? But then there's a very, very formal part of paying it forward, right? What you want to do is you want to inspire others to find and follow the intersection of their passion, their interest, and their talent. So it's very, very explicit in a way that ikigai is not. And so even if, the only thing that people got out of yesterday, I mean, it was certainly important that they get the idea that I'm excited and I'm passionate, and that you could find a topic like chocolate or like cocoa and turn it into, right, a career. what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, listen, um, no matter what you may want to do with your life, no matter what you may want to do with your life, there is a way to connect it to chocolate. So let's say again, young children, they're being homeschooled. I don't know what the curriculum is, but if you have an interest in archaeology, then there is a connection from archaeology into chocolate. And so I had prepared this whole list. I didn't get through all of them yesterday. I had them here, so I was thinking about them. So if any of the children asked me questions, I would be able to respond to them. So I was very, very fortunate when I was in Ecuador last October to be able to sit down in a lecture of Dr. Francisco Valdez. Dr. Valdez has been doing work in the Zamora Chinchipe area of Ecuador, so southeastern corner near the border of Peru, and among the remains of the Santa Ana La Florida people. And it is from the analysis of the pottery and other archaeological evidence which is found in that part of the world that we now understand that the humans were domesticating and using cocoa beans as far back as 5,500 years ago. And so yes, if you're interested in archaeology, there's a way to connect it to cocoa and chocolate, right? And so archaeology is one of the chocolate-colored lenses that you could look at the world. You're not going to find much archaeology, right? When you look at at Europe and Africa and other parts of the world, because they didn't get cocoa until the 1500s, 1600s. But we can also take a look at archaeology among the Olmec and the Toltec, the pre-Maya and Maya and Aztec civilizations as well, the pre-Hispanic civilizations. All right. And one of the questions that interested me, we didn't talk about this yesterday, was when I went to Ecuador for the first time actually the second time in 2005, one of the things that I was interested in was understanding if there was any iconography of cacao in cultural artifacts which predated the Europeans. So what were the feelings of the indigenous peoples living in that area before the arrival of Europeans? And could you see any connection in cocoa? Would you find it in their pottery? Would you find images of cocoa in the pottery? Would you find images of the cocoa in their textiles? I mean, we find connections to maize, corn gods, and things like that. They're connected, but not so much cocoa and chocolate. Just really interesting question to me, and it is this overlap in terms of archaeology and art. I mean, I'm a photographer by training. So I go there and I use my photography background to go and document what it is that I see when I go travel. But I'm always interested in looking for. I mean, here's a fabric, and it's got some. It's very, very floral in nature. But I do have some shirts which have cocoa pod imagery in them. So I'm always looking for examples of art in one form or another, which depict cacao in one form or another. So really, really interesting to me, and to understand where it is coming from. Right? We didn't talk so much, but I mean, so again, I'm reacting to what it is the class is going on, is talking about. But I asked, we talked actually a lot about tasting, so which makes a whole lot of sense. We tasted two chocolates. The first one was from Tanzania, and a 74% cocoa camille, and everybody got a chance to taste it. And I asked everybody, what do you taste? And somebody who was sitting up front said strawberry, and then somebody who sat in back said figs, and sort of jokingly, I said dried figs or fresh figs, and they thought about it for a second. Fresh figs, and not necessarily a flavor that I would have ever thought about in cocoa camille, but certainly, but the fact that this, I would say, maybe 11 or 12-year-old had the presence of mind to consider the question and to be able to say fresh figs. I turned around and asked a parent, I mean, they've had fresh figs. I mean, they do know what they are. And the answer is yes, they've had fresh figs. I mean, one of the things that was most exciting for me about this is just the level of sophistication of this group of students. I don't know what I was expecting. I didn't have expectations for where the group would be, but number one, the willingness of most of them to be able to participate in what it is that's going on and have really sophisticated responses that said that they had done a lot of thinking about some of these topics. I mean, the same boy who said that he tasted fresh figs in this cocoa camille said when I handed around a cup of raw unroasted cocoa beans, put his nose in them, and I asked everybody what they were smelling when they were smelling the cocoa beans, and he said that he smelled salt, right? And that's not an aroma, right? That I don't know that I ever thought about that smelling cocoa beans. The cocoa beans smelled salty. And so when the cup finally came back to me after passing it around to everybody, I stuck my nose in it. And excuse me, and I don't necessarily know that I would have pulled salty out of it, but having somebody say to me it smelled to them salty, I understood what it was that they were trying to say when they said that they tasted salt in it. And so, for me, this is one of the reasons why I love to do classes of all kinds. I mean, I don't like doing things the same way every single time. If I'm this tasting class that I'm doing next Tuesday, which is whiskeys and chocolates, I've never tasted any of the whiskeys, and I've only tasted two of the chocolates. And so for me, I'm going to be talking about the process that I go through, and I'll talk about this more next Friday when I do my follow-up on the class. But every opportunity to go in and talk about it is an opportunity to learn something. And that's the way I go into every single one of my classes, is that for me, every one of the classes is an opportunity for me to learn, right? I'm doing things in a new way, talking about things that are new to me in ways that are new to me, and reacting to what it is that my audience is telling me that is interesting to them. And in the process of all this, I get to learn a lot of new and interesting things, and that for me, any day in which I can learn something new is a good day. And for me, it's just really really valuable that to think about things that way. So we were talking about taste, and one of the questions is like we talked about everybody knew about taste buds on the tongue, and then but did anybody know that there were taste buds that went all the way down your throat? And one or two people raised their hands, and we talked about olfactory receptors in the nose, and that taste is a combination of the chemical things that are happening on your tongue with the chemical things that are happening on your nose. And so I got to introduce this notion of if you're interested in chemistry, then there are aspects of chemistry that connect to chocolate, right? And there's a cumulative case to be made, but we were also talking about, in this particular case, we're talking about physiology, right? So physiology, the way taste works, we didn't get into it in much depth. They didn't seem to be interested in it, and 6-year-olds were getting a little fidgety after about half an hour. Right. So I needed to be very, very careful to engage and again, not get into lecturing, but talking about how every single person has a different sense of taste and every person has a different sense of smell. And this is how it works. And then to be able to talk about the perception of bitterness, right? That it's interesting to me that young children tend not to have the chemistry in their tongue that makes bitter things taste good to them. And they get there when they hit puberty, but we had an answer to him. It's like, how many kids like broccoli, right? And how many kids like asparagus, and how many kids like Brussels sprouts? And I was blown away by the number of kids, right, who just were enthusiastically raising their hands about loving, Brussels sprouts and asparagus and broccoli as children, because that's not my memory. Not my memory as a child. And then asking people about coffee, right? How many people like coffee, and do they drink black coffee, and things like that. So it was teasing out to them and talking about physiology in terms of their own experience and how their taste buds will change from, whatever age they are until they hit puberty, and, and how bitterness is a sign of poison in nature. And, it's as you get older, your ability to not just tolerate poison, or tolerate bitterness, but to be able to embrace it and enjoy it is a really, really interesting characteristic, something that's unique to humans as far as we know. But the notion that, seeds are bitter, the cacao seeds are bitter, and so that the animals and birds who would have opened up the cocoa pods would have sucked the pulp. And so I had a picture of a pod opened with seeds surrounded by pulp, right? That squirrels and rats and birds, the monkeys would have opened up these pods and then sucked the pulp off it and then spread the seeds, because the cacao pods, when they rot, don't fall, or when they turn ripe, they don't fall from the tree. They're called what is indehiscent. So we did talk a little bit of biology and botany in there. We got a chance to talk about physiology. I have this really, really wonderful mortar and pestle that I use, and put nibs in it and talk about grinding, right? Grinding nibs into chocolate. And if the kids want to do that, I let them get in there and see just how much work it is to be able to grind the nibs. This is before we add sugar into it, just grind the nibs and turn them into sugar. And that leads to an introduction to notions of physics. Right. So, physics is a really, really interesting area that many, many children are interested in. They just don't know that they're interested because they don't know how physics apply to what they're doing. And this is part of, for me, what's interesting. This is what keeps me interested in all of this, is that, for example, speaking with people about the design of melanger, and you're looking at the fluid flow within a melanger and how that fluid flow in the melanger affects mixing and refining and flavor development. Computational fluid dynamics is something I would really, really be interested in seeing if I could find somebody model how changing scraper positions and the profiles of grinding stones and things like that within a bowl are going to affect things like mixing. Right. For me, it's just fascinating. I have, because the Rhode Island School of Design has an architecture department and an industrial design discipline within the architecture department, and I've worked with professional pastry chefs who are doing competition showpieces. The notion of applying, for example, techniques like a finite element analysis is what you're doing is you're looking at the structural strength of materials and how they react under stress, tension and compression, and things like this. So that what you can do is you can understand what the breaking point of a material is going to be, so that if you were to put together a piece, right, of a particular shape and then put it under stress, you'd know at what point, how much stress it would be able to stand up to, and where it would fracture and how it would fracture if it broke, is really interesting to me in the context of chocolate. So could we do finite element analysis on chocolate? Right. So if I want to be able to build a competition showpiece, I would actually have some really, really good science-based evidence for, like, how thick does the piece need to be, and if there's an angle, how sharp an angle can I make, right? How curved does it need to be, and how would that change from a dark chocolate to a milk chocolate to a white chocolate, for example? I mean, what are the structural properties of chocolate from a showpiece perspective? And by understanding this, the physics of it and the chemistry of it, understanding that, what would that mean for the kinds of creative expression that I could engage in creating a chocolate showpiece? I just for me, I don't know about for you, and let me know. I mean, if there's an aspect of chocolate or cocoa that interests you, and you're thinking about, these areas of education, or these areas of professional specialization that interest you. And by the way, I actually haven't included any of the chocolate specific ones here. Right? So I haven't talked about being a chocolatier or being a chocolate maker. None of those is here, right? These are other things that I can think about, that, if you're interested in any of these topics. So if you're interested in economics, what is the question? What is the relation of economics into chocolate and cocoa? Well, certainly we have the market exchanges. So we have to understand New York and London and commodities exchanges and spot trading and futures. The spot trading market, the futures market, putting together complex hedging strategies. I mean, these are just some of the examples of ways that I can think about how economics will connect to chocolate. And economics is related to business and finance. And so if you're interested in any of these things, then there is an opportunity to get involved in the world of cocoa and in the world of chocolate. So any, is there any aspect of human existence that can't be connected to chocolate in some way? I've not been able to think about any of them. We were talking yesterday, and one of the students brought up, because we're talking about this particular topic, and she mentioned astronomy, and the answer is yeah. I mean, astronomy is really, really interesting, and the connection to cocoa and chocolate. Certainly, there are creation myths among the pre-Maya and the Maya and Aztec peoples connecting cocoa to the gods, and the gods are up in the heavens. But there's actually a much more interesting connection to that, I think, which is initially, one of the theories goes that we looked up at the skies and we saw that when particular configurations of stars were in particular locations in the sky, things happened. So we see the stars in the sky, and then a week later, the Nile starts flooding, for example. And so for who knows how long in human existence, what was going on up in the sky was a portent. It said, here's something that's going to happen in the future. And the civilizations that were better observers of this could have more control over the environment. So anticipating that there would be a flood in a couple of weeks or so was a good thing, and you could prepare for it. And knowing when that would happen would be a good thing, right? It would give you some control over the environment. But it didn't take long to go from there to saying these are predictors of things that are happen, is to saying that these constellations up in the sky, these configurations of stars, are actually influencing what it is that's going on. So we begin to anthropomorphize them, and this is where we have the notion of the stars becoming representations of animals, representations of gods, but still it's all about having control over our environment, the more we know about what's going on. So there are connections, right? I can plausibly make a connection between chocolate, or at least cacao, and astronomy. And there may be others. And if you know of any others, please, put them in the comments. Whether you're, at YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, go into the comments. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. And then if you have an area of study or an area of professional focus that you think is connected to chocolate that particularly fascinates you, that's not on this list. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just these are things that came to me in the course of putting together the post for today's live stream. Now, anybody who knows, who's been watching the Chocolate Live for any period of time, knows that I am concerned with issues related to ethics, what it means to be ethical, what a definition of ethics is. And so that's also connected to language, the words we use. So the words we use inform our beliefs inform our actions have consequences. And so the language that we use and the history of language and how it influences our relationship to other people and what that means for those interpersonal and business relations come under the rubric of ethics. I mean, I have a very, very simple definition of ethics, which is having to do with not taking advantage of anyone else. I mean, especially when there's an imbalance of power, you're not going to take advantage of an asymmetric power relationship to unfairly disadvantage someone else. And so, that's, very, very simple definition of ethics. I'm not a big fan of the golden rule, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Because I can imagine there are some people who say, well, this is the way I want to be treated, and therefore I'm going to treat other people this way. So I don't think that the positive affirmation of that is the way to go. I think that the negative proposition is actually more effective, which is don't do to others as you would want to have done to you. I think is a much more interesting way to go think about that. But let me know what you think. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you have a different idea of ethics? I mean, how do you think language puts into connects with all of this? Because for me, I mean, one of the great things about working with chocolate, and one of the great things that I love about putting together these live streams, is in many respects I have no idea the direction they're going to take. Somebody's going to put something into the comments, and it's going to take me in a direction that I never would have thought of going before. Right? People will just throw me questions in my email on a daily basis, or I'll be looking at LinkedIn. I'll be looking at Instagram. I might be looking at Reddit, and all of a sudden there's this fabulous question that I get that causes me to think about things in new ways. And that's one of the reasons why I engage in all these platforms is, number one, is that they help me in terms of the way I think about the world. And hopefully what I can do is I can help other people in terms of their view of the world. I mean, for me, it's been really, really interesting, for example, to think about sort of mathematics in the broader scheme of things, which includes, among other things, measuring and estimation. So one of the things I love about estimation is actually a skill that my father taught me, who was trained as a mathematician, undergraduate at Reed, and did his master's at Yale in mathematics. I never wanted to do maths. I mean, I was so interested in being a fine artist when I grew up. I didn't want to follow that. But one of the things that my father did teach me, and one of the things that's really interesting, is around this notion of estimation. So about how big should the answer be? So if somebody says, how multiply these two numbers together, right? Most of the time, you don't need to have an exact response, right? It's good enough to know it's about this size, right? So when you actually, if you work it out by hand or if you put it in a calculator, you'll know if you made a mistake or not. So if you're looking at, 50 times 20 is 1,000, right? But if you didn't know that and you put it in your calculator and you got some other number, you'd go, that's wrong, right? So knowing, for example, that to go from a meter to a yard is about 10%, right? So 100 meters is about 110 yards. That's a useful thing to know. It's like, when you go from pounds to kilograms, the conversion is about half in one direction, right? It's a half plus 10% both ways, right? Or twice plus 10% in the other direction. So 1 kilogram is 2 pounds, right? 2.2 pounds. So you double it and you add 10%, or 454 grams, it's 500 less 50, 10%. So there's the ability to estimate things, right? To go back and forth between a system which is fairly irrational, which is pounds and feet and inches. I mean, it makes sense, right, when you know what they are, but if you have to go back and forth and to be able to, what are the conversions? How do you feel comfortable? For me, 80% of what I do, 90% of what it is that I do, including the daily stuff that doesn't have anything to do with chocolate, is all in the metric system. And it was made easy for me in photography. So 20 degrees centigrade is the color for black and white chemistry. That's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. 30 degrees centigrade is the temperature for color chemistry. It's 86 Fahrenheit. That's 18 degrees. So 10 degrees centigrade is each degree is 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And that's where the 9/5 comes from. And so making these connections in the way that understands you, this is where mathematics and estimation, become really, really, really interesting. So if you say, 1,000,000 metric tons of cocoa, and for each metric ton of cocoa, there's 100 liters of juice. So that's 100 million liters of juice. Just being able to come up with that is a useful skill to have, just to make sure that you're um, in the right ballpark. But then there's also the notion of, how do you make these numbers? So a number like 100 million doesn't make much sense, right? So because it's too big, nobody can in their mind grasp 100 million. But one of the ways to do, for example, is to compare it to something. So there are 50 states in the United States. So how many times does 50 do 100 million? So it's like 2,000. Is it 2,000? Is it 200,000? So you need to get an idea of the order of magnitude. So would it make sense that, if I did, 20,000 or 200,000 of these for each state, and then I divide by 365, which is for each day of the year, and I can go, well, 365 is actually 400 minus 40, 10%. I mean, this plus 10% comes in a lot all over the place. So what I could do is I could divide this number by 400, and then add that 10% for the difference between 365 and 400, and get close enough to understand, well, it means about this much, right, for every state in the United States for every day. And so now you have a handle on how big something is. The population of the United States is about 300 million. If I have 100, if I've got 1 million metric tons and 100 liters of juice, that's 100 million liters of juice. That's a third of a liter of juice for every person in the United States. Mathematics estimation, it really, really fun and interesting way, and to think about cocoa and chocolate. And for me, this is something that I use all the time when I'm looking at um, sustainability reports. I'm looking at fair reports. When people are talking about, what it is that they're doing, what is they're delivering, the value that they're giving. So if I have, 8,000 farming families, and there are between 6 and 8 people, depending on Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, right, and per family, and then okay, um, I've got, if I give them 3 million in extra premiums every year, what does 3 million mean, per person on a weekly basis? So being able to get to a rough idea about what that is in your head, not necessary to be precise about it, just get an idea. You can always work it on a calendar, on a calculator, but you've got an idea about where it is that you want to go. I think is really, really important, and that leads it, into, its connections to mechanical engineering. So if you're in chocolate and you're making chocolate, you're doing anything with chocolate, you have machines, right? And so understanding how machines work is really, really important. I'm fortunate enough to have a machine out there in the world that's named after me. It's a small conch. It's called the Kligo. Why is it called the Kligo? Because Klee is actually the name of a painter, Paul Klee. My name is Clay. And so we went from Clay and Klee, and Geo is Gordon. So the Kligo is named after me. We're having a lot of fun puns with the language. But is a result of my understanding some of the processes that were going on. And I go, oh, if we take a machine that was used for something else, we can do this with it. Right, so understanding the processes involved from a mechanical engineering perspective, understanding some of the physics of what's going on, is really, really helpful, right? And if you are interested in building things or in taking them apart and putting them back together, I know that that's one of the things that Art Pollard talks about when he was starting up Amano Chocolate, when, he was just he was fascinated by pulling machines apart and putting them back together and understanding how they all worked. It's a very, 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 very seminal conversation for me way back in, I want to say, 2003, 2004, something like that. It's been a long time since I had that conversation. It really, really important to understand. So when you think about how a cracker works or how a winnower works and how to do something, I mean, it's really, really important. So there, all this stuff going together and putting, which I think is really, really fascinating. For me, it's what keeps me interested in cocoa and chocolate. I mean, I got to say, as I said, I don't consider myself to be an expert in chocolate. If you've got your chocolate fingers in chocolate every day, and you're making stuff, you're an expert in chocolate, right? But these are the things that interest me about chocolate and provide me with um, um, the a newness. Everything is an exploration. Everything is new. It's about new understanding and putting the pieces together and coming up with things. This is what fascinates me, and I think that's what it is that I do well. It's one of the things that I do well, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about chocolate in really, really interesting ways. So Mark Colbath, who's connected. Hey, Mark, good to see you today. So from Facebook, contrary to most things, I do like to talk about chocolate after learning so much on my own and from sites such as yours. There's so much practical business and science to teach that kids of all ages could learn about. You know, so absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of stuff, and I think that one of the things that I've learned, I helped raise four girls, and one of the things that I learned is that it's much easier to get them interested in trying to solve a problem or understand, like, I could never understand why I needed to know anything about dot products when I was studying mathematics in high school. It's like, I can't understand how I'd ever want to use these. I'm going to be a photographer. Right. So I was interested, however, in understanding about the chemistry of photography. I was interested in understanding, the physics of light bending through lenses and things like that. But I wasn't interested in the dot products and similar kinds of mathematics. I spent a lot more time learning how a slide rule works. But I think that going back, Mark, I don't know how long you've been listening, but going back to this question of ikigai. All right. One of the things that I wanted to do yesterday as a result of this is to be able to show the people, the kids and the parents, because they're as much the audience for this as the children were, in my mind anyway, is that this notion of ikigai, this notion of the chocolate life, finding something that you are good at and that interests you, right? No matter what it is, right? Is, I think, one of the keys to being a productive person, and to having a happy life, right? And that what we can do, I think, and certainly one of the roles I had as a parent was to help my kids discover that intersection, right? If I could help them understand what truly interested them, and to help them show to themselves that they had a talent or a skill, that they were good at what interested them, then the learning part of it, the teaching part of it, all these other things were a whole lot easier, right? So, the challenge becomes like, okay, why do I need to learn calculus? Because I can't imagine ever needing to use calculus anytime in my life, right? Um, and I have to admit that I'm not great at calculus. It's just that I don't remember all the rules of trigonometry. And one of the great things is there are a bunch of tools that you can get to online, reference books, in when I was growing up, that you could go to, and all you needed to do was understand how to go look for answers. And I think that's one of this intellectual curiosity, which is, for me, is what is embedded here. On any particular day, I could be talking about comparative religion or cultural anthropology or ethics or genetics or microbiology. I mean, I had a fabulous time working with Ingeman in Nicaragua from 2014 to 2017, Zoe Papalex-Nandratu, understanding a lot more about the microbiology of the fermentation, and what's going on, and being able to, really go and understand better, understand it well enough to be able to talk to other people about what was actually going on and explain to them, and hopefully fuel their curiosity, right? Get them interested in understanding why they should want to find out the answers to the questions. Finding my kids' friends who were sort of discouraged by the system, who didn't appear to have much curiosity around any of the topics that they were being taught in school, right? Was disheartening to me as a parent. And thinking about my experience when I was in school. Now, for me, what I would love to do is I would love to create an entire curriculum right? Which had components, right, in every single one of these areas, right? There would be a 1 week block, right, in archaeology where we would talk about archaeology, right, using it as a lens, chocolate as a lens. We're going to look at chocolate, boom, look through the chocolate lens at archaeology. What does it mean? We're going to look at art through this lens. We're going to look at biology and botany. So every single one of these represents, right, an opportunity to get someone curious, right? Curious enough to want to go out and find answers for themselves, to be able to focusing on the things that, you know, you know there are these stereotypes of, what we want to be. Do you want to be an astronaut when you grow up? Do you want to be a fireman when you grow up? Do you want to be whatever, the ballerina? What is it that you want to be when you grow up, right? It is, I think, one of the purposes of education, right, to instill this curiosity about the way the world works, and then to provide skills in terms of how to go find answers. Not necessarily giving people the answers and rewarding them for giving specific answers, but going through and understanding how to go find the answer to a question. I haven't talked about, the notion of how do you become a critical consumer of media, which I think would be another thing to put in here. How do you understand how particular facts can be presented in one way, or multiple people, looking at the same set of facts, can come up with entirely different interpretations of those facts, is really, really very interesting to me. Anyway, so that's what I was doing yesterday for this class of 23 children. I had this whole list of topics. Here's the list of topics, right, that I had prepared to talk about. I had prepared myself to talk about, depending upon what the kids, questions I asked of them, right, the answers to my questions and the questions that they asked of me. I didn't go in there saying, first I'm going to talk about, this, and then I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about that. And, I'm not going to be aware of, who's fidgeting where, and, what they're responding to and what they're not responding to. What I was going to do is I was going to put myself in I think, slightly more uncomfortable position of not necessarily knowing how the class was going to progress, right? I didn't know from point A to point B to point C to point D what was happening, knowing that we might be going from point A to point F to point G to point Y, right, until we got to some place, and I didn't have any idea what that last point was going to be, other than to make the final point that I did, which was about this notion of finding something that you really, really interested in, right? And telling people, chocolate and cocoa is pretty cool things to be interested in, right? And then to be able to say what you're interested in and then what you're good at. And I think that's where education, certainly earlier, right? Education should be all about. Should be about stimulating curiosity. Should be helping people find out what they're interested in and what they are good at. And if we can help people find that, right, then I think, from my experience, we have healthier, happier people in general. And that's what I wanted to do yesterday for this group of homeschoolers. And I don't know if anybody agrees with me or disagrees with me. Put it in the comments. Let me know what you think. I would be interested in knowing, number one, is there anything that you think should be on this list that's not on this list? What you can do is you can go back to the post. If you're a member of the Chocolate Life, what you can do is there's this discussion on the bottom of every page. You can, if you are a member, boom, you can put a comment down here. If you're not a member, I'm currently logged in. So if you're not a member, you can go here to the top of the page, and where it says account, right, which it'll say join. Just click on the join. You can be a free member. There are some premium memberships. I appreciate that. And I just want to remind everybody as we close out today's episode of the Chocolate Life Live that this episode, as all episodes of the Chocolate Life Live, are sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. You can help me if you're watching on YouTube, like doing a thumbs up on the video. liking, putting a comment on the video. The algorithm is what the algorithm is. But if you're on LinkedIn, go and engage there. Become a member of the Chocolate Life, right? And it would be greatly appreciated. It helps me in so many ways to be able to go and continue the things that I have been doing here. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Chocolate Life Live. This is episode number 128, so that's pretty cool. I had no idea that that's where I would be when I started this nearly 2 years ago, and it's a lot of fun for me. I think that's a great segue to the end of um, this Chocolate Life Live. Before I say that next Friday, so a week from today, I'll be doing a follow-up on my whiskey and chocolate pairing, 4 Arizona whiskeys, 4 Arizona chocolates. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to be taking a looking at is woke washing the new greenwashing. And I'm going to say thank you all. Everybody, listen, have a great weekend. And remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, I think you're doing it wrong and you need to reconsider your life choices. But until then, everybody,